Hi, I'm John Freedman, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., where I lead government affairs for Suez. And I'm going to talk today about water reuse policies around the world. For those who aren't familiar with the company, Suez is one of the world's leading water treatment and waste management companies with 90,000 employees and 450,000 customers in 120 countries around the world. On the water treatment side of things, we operate 3,400 drinking water and wastewater treatment plants in 70 countries, serving 100 million people. We also make water treatment technologies that are used by cities and businesses all over the world to treat virtually every type of water and wastewater imaginable. One of the things we're really focused on is water reuse technologies. And that's because if you look around the world today, you'll see that we have increasing scarcity, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we've developed an entire suite of water reuse technologies that can recover really effectively more than 99% of water from pretty much any source of wastewater. And that recovered water can be reused for things like growing crops, which in the developing world is about 70% of all water use, or for running power plants, which in places like the US, which are highly developed, accounts for about 40% of all water use, or even filling drinking water reservoirs for direct potable reuse, like we're seeing now in places like San Diego, California. But here's the thing, even though we're seeing increasing water scarcity in many parts of the world, and if you look at this map on the left of your screen, produced by the World Resources Institute, it shows that about 1.2 billion people globally live in areas that are chronically short of water. So even though we have all this water treatment technology, and even though we're seeing increasing scarcity in many parts of the world is still only reusing about 2% of its treated wastewater today. Now, why is that? Well, when we ask our customers, they say, look, it's often simply cheaper to keep taking water from the ground, even though the groundwater might be depleted, as it is in India, or to take water from rivers that may be running short of water, or from potable municipal systems where water is almost universally underpriced, than it is to buy and implement water reuse technologies. So there's really a role for governments to step in and create policies that will promote greater water reuse in the face of these challenging economics. And one of the places in the world where this would make a lot of sense is India, which right now is seeing tons of water scarcity, and about 54% of the population of India today lives in areas of high to extremely high water stress. And you don't need to look at this map to know that. All you need to do is read the newspaper, where you'll see that cities like Chennai have been literally running out of water because the groundwater is so depleted that when it stops raining, there's just not enough supply to meet demands. So that's why we recently released this white paper you see at the bottom left of the screen, where we create a menu of policy options that the Indian government can choose from to promote greater water reuse. And what are these policy options? Well, there are really 4 things that governments can do to promote greater water reuse. The first is education and outreach. In other words, explain to people it's not only safe to reuse water, but it is important to do so. And one of the ways you can do that is through recognition and reward programs. In other words, give credit to people who do a good job of reusing water. So they're encouraged, and others are encouraged to reuse more water themselves. And here in the US, last year, the federal government released a national water reuse action plan, which today has 41 action items to promote greater reuse. One of those items is to create a national award for corporations that put together good water reuse programs. The second thing governments can do to promote greater reuse is remove existing barriers. One of these barriers is a lack of clear regulations. If there aren't clear regulations telling communities and businesses what level of treatment is required for what type of reuse, then a lot of organizations will simply not be comfortable moving forward with water reuse programs. So one example of removing barriers, when the International Standards Organization in 2015 released new guidelines on what levels municipal wastewater had to be treated to before they could be used for agriculture. And then last year, we just saw the European Council of the EU release new guidelines, again, for taking municipal wastewater so it could be reused for agriculture. The third thing governments can do to promote reuse is create incentives. In other words, grants or low-cost loans that businesses and communities can use to implement reuse programs. And here in the US, the US Bureau of Reclamation, which is part of the Department of Interior, has a program called Title 16, where they provide grants for up to 25% of the cost of municipal reuse projects. And then finally, the fourth thing that governments can do to promote greater water reuse is put in place regulations and mandates. In other words, they can simply say to businesses or communities, you have to reuse water as a way of mitigating water scarcity. And one example of this is in Canada several years ago in the oil sands in Alberta province, the provincial government created a new regulation that said, look, if you're going to be producing oil, you simply have to recycle at least 90% of water you use in the process, because the river that was being used as a source of water for the oil production process was running unsustainably low, the Athabasca River. So here in the US, I think this, last year and this year, we're going to see a burst of activity promoting greater water reuse. And as I mentioned last year, the government released the National Water Reuse Action Plan. That's where 5 different agencies came together, kind of led by EPA, to create these 41 action items that I already mentioned. And now, as of January 20th, when President Biden's administration has taken over, we're seeing a renewed focus on addressing climate change. And what does this mean? Well, it means that from a water perspective, that climate change is really making a lot of places hotter and drier and driving much more water scarcity. So we need to take action. And how do we take action to help mitigate the impacts of climate change with respect to water? Well, the principal thing we can do is water reuse. Take wastewater and treat it so we can sustainably increase our supply of water forever. Right now, the Biden administration is working with Congress on a COVID relief program, but as soon as it gets past that, it will turn its attention to a $2.4 trillion infrastructure and energy transformation plan. And the Biden administration has already been communicating with key leaders in Congress about preparing the legislation to implement this plan. And I think what we'll see later this year, during the spring and maybe leading into early summer, is an infrastructure package coming out of Congress that will have significant water drivers. including direct funding for water recycling and reuse. So that concludes my direct presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.